wanna sleep in, cause I got something to prove. I gotta take what I...
Do you have questions about starting a trucking business? Box truck or CDL, I've done both. I can help you start your trucking business or grow your business so that you can buy more trucks. Use the link in the description to schedule a one-on-one consultation with me. Now let's get to the video. Hey everybody, welcome back to another one of my videos. My name is Zach Pasquarello and I am the box truck accountant. In this video, I'm going to talk about trucking company challenges. This video should help you if you're thinking about starting a trucking company. This will help you plan for some challenges you might see. Or if you've already been in business, this should help you improve your processes or fix some of your problems. In this video, we're going to talk about regulations like hours of service and electronic logging devices. We're going to talk about fuel, specifically fuel cards, and mapping out stops. Whether you're the driver or you have a driver, it's really important to pick a fuel station that not only has a good price, but also is close to your original route. There's no point in going 20 miles out of the way to save a couple pennies. Next, we're going to talk about cash flow. As you already know, in this business, we receive a lot of money, but we also have a lot of expenses. So it's important to manage your cash flow, because if you don't collect payments from brokers quickly, it can very easily get out of hand. And most brokers pay in 30 to 60 days. So luckily we have options like factoring companies or lines of credit. Driver retention, especially in today's labor market, can be really difficult. There's a difference between a CDL driver and a non-CDL driver. I'll talk about that. Also, how do you negotiate miles and pay when it comes to recruiting your drivers and also managing your drivers and keeping them happy so they stick around. So, who am I? A little bit of background information on me. I was an infantry officer in the Army for 4 years, and I got out of the Army in 2019. Started working at Chewy, specifically the warehouse. I was a manager, and from there I started taking some accounting classes, went back to school, and so I started up my own bookkeeping business. So I left Chewy, started my own bookkeeping business. I've been doing that for 2 years now. With my logistics experience from working at Chewy and my accounting and finance background as a bookkeeper, I decided to open up a trucking company. So I've been running my trucking company for the past little bit over a year now. Okay, now we're going to talk about regulation. Obviously, the FMCSA and the Department of Transportation heavily regulate the trucking industry, mostly because there are so many trucks on the road. It could be really dangerous if we don't have proper regulations in place. A lot of these regulations are meant to keep people safe. Sometimes, though, they can be really tricky to understand. So I'm going to try to explain some of the main points. First of all, hours of service. If you're driving your truck, you can only work so many hours per day, so many hours per week, specifically 11 and 14. What that means is you can drive 11 hours every day and you can be quote unquote on duty for 14 hours every day. And your clock starts as soon as you go on duty or as soon as you start driving. So a misconception, and maybe this is just me, but this is what I thought in the beginning. I did not know the 14 hours was consecutive. So I thought maybe I could drive for 3 hours, take a 4-hour break, drive for 6 hours, take a 5-hour break, drive for 8 hours. I thought as long as I did not exceed 14 hours in any given day that I'd be fine, but that's not the case. There's an important distinction. With the 14-hour rule, you need to take 10 consecutive hours off duty every single day. So no matter what, if you start working at 7 a.m., you need to go off duty at 9 p.m. and you need to stay off duty for 10 consecutive hours. Every 8 hours, you need to take a 30-minute break. So technically, you're supposed to be completely off duty. Not only is there a daily requirement, but there's also a weekly requirement. So for every 7 days, you cannot be on duty for more than 60 hours in a 7-day span. With that 7-day, 60-hour requirement, you also need to take a 34-hour reset. So typically, what I have my driver do is work Monday through Friday, sometimes work Saturday morning, maybe Saturday afternoon. I usually have him take his reset Saturday evening into Monday morning. So it's 34 hours. So if he stops at 6 p.m. on Saturday, that means he needs to wait until 4 a.m. on Monday to start driving again. There is an exception. There's a 150 air mile short haul exception. So it's not looking at the GPS road miles. It's literally on the map, point to point, air miles. As long as you stay within 150 air miles, your business location, so like your headquarters or the address of your business, you do not need to adhere to most of these hours of service regulations. But with that being said, I definitely recommend look up for yourself the FMCSA website, the Department of Transportation. Get very well versed in these hours of service, because if you get pulled over and you're not following the hours of service by a DOT officer, then they can just put you out of service on the spot, and you'll be required to wait 10 hours until you can start driving again. Not only that, it's also just really not safe to drive for more than 11 hours or to work for more than 14 hours, because you're obviously operating really heavy equipment, and if you're tired, then that's just not safe. The electronic logging device makes tracking your hours really simple, but you also need to understand that you can't mess around with this, because it's all pretty much automated. As soon as you turn the truck on, as soon as you start driving, the ELD turns on and it starts tracking your hours and your driving time. I use GoMotive. They were formerly Keep Truckin', but from all the owner operators I talked to, a lot of people use GoMotive, and it's super simple to use. It's only $40 a month, and they send you the hardware, and the software is just an application on your phone. So you download the Keep Truckin' app and you connect the hardware directly to your truck. It's kind of simple to connect the hardware. It's going to take you a couple hours, but it just plugs into your computer on your truck. Like I said, it automatically tracks your on-duty time and your miles driven. So as soon as you start driving, it's going to start your 14-hour clock. As soon as you go on duty to do your pre-trip inspection, it's going to start your on-duty time for that day. And once you've had a log entry, you can't just delete it. So if you make a mistake and you go on duty, you won't be able to delete it. You can add a note, and you can kind of explain like, hey, this was for personal conveyance, or this was just a yard move. I didn't mean to do this. But you can't just delete a log entry once it's been entered into the ELD. Another cool thing is if you go to your website, gomotive.com, or whatever ELD you might be using, if you are a dispatcher or an owner, not necessarily the driver, then you can track your vehicle or your vehicles, however many you have, you can track them perfectly with the GPS, and you can see where they are, how fast they're going, how long of a break did they take. It makes it really nice for tracking your drivers. And lastly, you can add what's called a geofence. So I use this for all of my pickups and all of my deliveries. You can enter in the address for the receiver or the shipper, and so I know as soon as my truck gets to that address or leaves that address, I get an alert. It's either an email or a text message. So it makes it really easy to track your detention time. So I literally get an email, hey, at 11:15 a.m. driver 1 got to pick up 1 for today, and then 2 hours later I'll get an email saying driver 1 left, pick up 1. And that way I don't have to keep on logging into the website, checking the app. I'll just know, okay, he's been there for 2 hours, just got the email. So if you aren't using geofences, I highly recommend it. Fuel is crazy expensive. It's probably one of the top 3 biggest expenses that I have for my trucking company. Fuel cards, thankfully, make it a little better, but it's still not perfect. A lot of fuel cards are the same. I negotiated with Love's and Pilot, and I think I got like 16 or 18 cents off per gallon from both of them. But I ended up using the fuel card that comes with my factoring company, because my factoring company gave me an additional 0.05% off of my factoring fee, which might not sound like a lot, but 0.5% of $250,000 ends up being, so that little 0.5%, it's not a lot, but it was enough to convince me to use the fuel card that my factoring company offers. They're all really similar. All the fuel cards are really similar. They all have their pros and cons. I'm not going to really dive too deeply into specific fuel cards, but I would recommend at least check with your factoring company. If not your factoring company, then check with one of the 3 major truck stops, Love's, Pilot, TA. You can also get a fuel card from places like Exxon, Sunoco, BP. Now this is really important. So if you are the driver of your truck, then you're probably doing this no problem. But if you're hiring drivers, I did not do this in the beginning, but I recently started mapping out my drivers' fuel stops. So before, I just let my drivers get fuel wherever they wanted to, which in hindsight was probably a terrible idea. But now either myself or my dispatcher looks at the route and plans the most efficient spot for my driver to get fuel. I highly recommend this because if your driver's in Pennsylvania going down to South Carolina, the price of fuel is going to vary wildly depending on if you get it in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina. So I would recommend, if you're not doing it, at least look into planning where your driver stops to get fuel. It could very well save you 50 cents per gallon. I've had some issues with my driver getting showers because we don't always go to one of the big truck stops. I understand you can get a free shower if you pump 50 gallons at like Love's or TA or Pilot, but we don't always go to those big gas stations, and I think a shower is like 10 or 15 bucks. So I would rather go to one of the smaller gas stations and get a better discount on fuel and maybe just reimburse my driver for showers instead of going to one of the major truck stops, paying a premium for fuel just so we can get that free shower. Last thing I'll talk about fuel, if you're driving a non-CDL truck, you don't need to worry about IFTA. But if you have a CDL truck, you do need to file IFTA. It's super simple. IFTA was one of my biggest concerns before I got my CDL truck, but I've already filed it twice now. It's super simple. You only need to know two things. All you need to know is how many miles you drove in which state and how many gallons of fuel you pumped in which state. And you can get both of those things from your ELD and your fuel card. So don't worry about IFTA. You just file it with your state. So whatever state you live in or whatever state you file taxes for, that's the state you're going to be filing IFTA. Cash flow is really important with the trucking business because, like I said, our invoices, our revenue is so high. You're going to be making $5,000, if not $10,000 per week per truck. So you can see if you get 2 or 3 trucks, all of a sudden your accounts receivable is going to be very close to $1 million with only 3 or 4 trucks. It's important to note that brokers don't pay until 30, 60, or even sometimes 90 days. So I could deliver a load today, submit my invoice today, all the paperwork is perfect, and they will not initiate payment until 30 days from today. And if they're mailing you a check, it could take 5 to 7 days. If they're doing ACH direct deposit, it's still gonna take 2 or 3 days. So you're looking at least 35 days, best case scenario, to get paid from a broker. And whenever we're spending thousands of dollars each week on fuel, thousands of dollars on insurance, a lot of people just cannot sustain cash flow in their business in the first 30 days if they don't use a factoring company. There's a couple things to remember about using a factoring company. First of all, they own all of your accounts receivable. So just keep that in mind. Signing up with a factoring company is a really big deal. I always recommend do your own research, check the Better Business Bureau for all the factoring companies you're considering. A lot of factoring companies have not so good reviews with the Better Business Bureau. So just look into and do research on the factoring company before you sign up with them. There's 2 big differences. So there's recourse and non-recourse. Non-recourse factoring means that the factoring company is responsible for collecting payment. That's not normally how factoring companies are set up. Most factoring companies are set up with recourse, which means that you are responsible. So they will pay you in advance. So if you run a load today for $1,000, they will pay you $1,000 today or tomorrow. But in 30, 60, 90 days, if that broker does not pay, you are ultimately responsible. So keep that in mind. Just because you've received the money from your factoring company does not mean you are off the hook. You still need to make sure the broker pays your factoring company, which in my experience has been a real headache sometimes. But most brokers, as long as you do a credit check, most brokers will pay within 30 or 60 days. Just make sure you have all the proper paperwork. So make sure your driver has the bill of lading signed by the shipper and the receiver. Make sure the rate confirmation has the correct address on it, and make sure you submit the paperwork within 24 or 48 hours of delivering the load, because some brokers will even deduct $200 or $300 off your pay if you don't submit proof of delivery on time. Just always read the fine print of every rate confirmation. So if a company is non-recourse, which means the factoring company is ultimately responsible for collecting payment, they will charge probably the most out of all factoring companies. From what I've seen, they charge about 4%. So they're going to charge you an extra 1%. But at the end of the day, the factoring company is responsible for collecting money. And if they don't pay, the factoring company eats it, not you. But what I've seen mostly from like TAFs and RTS, they are recourse factoring. So you as the carrier are ultimately responsible. And the rates that I've seen are pretty standard across the board. 3.5% if you have a box truck or power only and you're not using their fuel card. They'll typically give you an extra 0.5% discount, so they'll give you 3% if you're running a box truck and power only and using their fuel card. And the best deal that I've seen for just one truck is 2.5% with a dry van or flatbed or reefer and using their fuel card. You can get 2.5%. Now, the last thing I'll talk about cash flow is a line of credit. So this is an alternative option to a factoring company. A line of credit is kind of similar to a factoring company, but it's not necessarily linked to your accounts receivable. It will largely depend on your personal credit score, and they could look at your past year or two income tax returns, and they're probably going to ask you pretty basic questions about your business. But I was actually able to get a $20,000 line of credit from Wells Fargo at 8% interest with very few questions asked. They only looked at my credit score. They did not ask for any financial documents, any tax documents. They quite simply just asked what was my revenue, what was my net income, what are my expenses. So the key difference here is that most people are only going to make $20,000 to $30,000 per month. So all you need is $20,000 or $30,000 of cash to front your accounts receivable. So potentially you could get a line of credit for $20,000 at 8% interest. And keep in mind that 8% interest is per year. So if you get a line of credit for $20,000 and just pull out all the money right now, put it in your checking account, you're only going to spend $1,600 per year on interest. And that should be enough money of a buffer to front your accounts receivable for an entire month until you get paid by the broker. Keep in mind, if you're not using a factoring company, you're going to need to send your invoice and send your Raycon and BOL directly to the broker. But as long as you have this $20,000 cash, you should be able to sustain operations until you get paid in 30 days by the broker. Now, the $1,600 per year in interest is in contrast to 2.5% of $250,000 comes out to $6,250 that you would pay in factoring fees. So you're going to save $5,000 per year if you use the line of credit instead of the factoring company. However, not everybody could be eligible for the line of credit, so it's not an option for everybody, but it's definitely something to look into. Like I said, I got mine from Wells Fargo. You could also probably get one from a local bank or a local credit union. I would recommend ask the bank who you have your business checking account set up with first, and then go from there. Now, this part of the video is primarily for people who are hiring a driver, not necessarily owner-operators who are driving their own truck. So first of all, I want to talk about the difference between a CDL driver and a non-CDL driver. First of all, if you have a box truck, a non-CDL driver, it's going to be a lot easier to find a driver, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to find loads for a box truck. I've seen a lot of guys have a lot of success with the box truck business and hiring non-CDL drivers. I tried it last year, wasn't really for me, but the thing that I will tell you, with a non-CDL driver, keep in mind it's basic labor, so you don't need any special requirements, any special driver's license. So like I said, it's going to be easier to find that driver and you're not going to pay him as much. I would recommend start out low, that way you can grow steadily as he stays with your company. Maybe after the first 3 months, give him a raise, 6 months, give him a raise, 12 months, give him a raise. Just try to start out low, that way you can increase his pay. I made a really bad mistake of paying my driver way too much in the beginning. So I would start him out at maybe 18 or 20 bucks an hour, maybe 40 or 45 cents per mile. And you can also do a revenue split. So you can pay your driver a percentage of revenue. And I would recommend maybe 20 to 25% of revenue. Now, for a CDL driver, it's going to be a lot more difficult to find a good CDL driver because they're in demand and big companies pay a lot of money to their CDL drivers. Keep in mind, it's a skilled labor position, so these guys have a special driver's license and you're going to pay for that premium. So expect to pay $25 to $28 an hour starting out, 55, 56 cents per mile. And also a lot of CDL drivers are probably going to want to be a W-2 employee, which means they're going to be looking for health benefits. They're going to be looking for potentially like a 401k match. So be prepared to incur extra expenses like payroll taxes, workers' comp insurance, healthcare benefits, 401k match. Retaining good drivers is really difficult because just being a driver is a really difficult job. Especially for me, I deal primarily with the spot market, so I don't have dedicated contracts, so my drivers are not going to the same shipper or the same receiver every single day. So my work day, my workflow varies wildly, and that can be really stressful for a driver. So if you are working in the spot market and looking to add drivers and add trucks, try to find some consistency, because I think that'll really help you in the long run. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find more consistent work, maybe a dedicated contract. I would be willing to take less money with a dedicated contract versus more money with inconsistent spot market freight. With that, just try to be transparent, try to be honest with your drivers whenever you're onboarding them, because if you tell your driver he's going to get 3,000 miles per week and he ends up getting 2,000 miles per week, he's going to be really unhappy. There's no point in lying to potential drivers just to get them in the door whenever after 2 or 3 weeks, after training them and getting them onboarded, they're just going to quit. So try to be transparent, try to be upfront with them how many miles they can actually expect to get, because from what I've seen, drivers really only care about how much they're going to get paid. They obviously want a decent truck, they want good communication with their dispatcher, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is how much money am I going to get paid, and most of the time that depends on how many miles they're going to drive. So it's up to you as the business owner, it's up to you as the dispatcher to make sure your driver can get enough miles. The other frustrating thing about the spot market is unload time. So going to different shippers and different receivers and different warehouses all the time, your driver might not know exactly where to go. It might take longer than usual to get unloaded or loaded. So definitely be prepared to pay detention pay for anything over 2 hours. So I pay my driver $25 an hour for anything over 2 hours, and I pay him $150 for a layover fee. So if he expected to deliver today and the warehouse wouldn't take him until tomorrow, then I would pay him an additional $150 as a layover fee. And hopefully you can get reimbursed directly from the broker for any detention pay or any layover fee. But from what I found, it's really, really difficult to get a hold of brokers after your load has been delivered to track down that detention pay or that layover pay. So you got to be really diligent about that. I'm probably going to make a video all about detention pay and layover pay and working with brokers. The other difference is over the road versus local driving. So I mentioned before that you might pay your driver 25 bucks an hour or 55 cents per mile. That really depends on what type of driving he's going to do. If he's a local driver, chances are you're not going to pay him per mile because he might only be driving 100 miles per day. You're probably going to pay your driver per hour, and I've seen a lot of hourly rates start at $20 an hour for a box truck driver and go all the way up to $30 an hour for a CDL driver. It really depends on the market you're in, the region you're in, and the experience level of the driver that you get. But if you're local, expect to pay him hourly or percentage of revenue, and if he's an over-the-road driver, expect to pay your driver per mile. I use a staffing agency to find my CDL driver just because I'm a new business. I was not very confident in my ability to find a driver. And one good thing about using the staffing agency, I got a driver with a lot of experience. So my driver has 20 years of experience and I got him in 4 days. So I reached out to my staffing agency. I said, hey, I'm getting a truck. I need a driver. They said, no problem. The very next week I had a driver and he was working within 4 days. So super fast and really experienced are the drivers, but it comes with a cost. So I pay 58% to my staffing agency on top of what I pay my driver. They do cover payroll taxes, which is 7%. They cover workers' comp, which is like 5 to 10%. And they have health insurance, but still I'm paying a premium for the staffing agency. The only good thing is that it's short term. It's only 6 months. After 6 months, the driver is completely mine. But I've already had one driver quit after 2 months, so I had to hire a second driver, and my 6-month clock started all over again. So I am just hoping that I can keep this driver for 6 months. That way we can get away from the staffing agency, and my cost of labor is going to decrease by 40 or 45%. But if you're ever in a pinch, a staffing agency is a great way to find a driver quickly and find a good driver. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on is safety. It was almost a joke when I worked at Chewy to say that safety is our #1 priority, but it really should be, because if your driver gets hurt or if your truck gets in an accident, then you are going to lose way more money and way more time than if you just spend extra time every day on safety, pre-trip inspection, post-trip inspection, maybe do like a 1 hour once a month safety course with your drivers. It really will pay dividends. In the first 11 months, you should expect to have a new entrant safety audit. I had mine almost exactly 11 months after my authority went active. And I'll be honest, I was really stressed about it, but it was super simple. I had a DOT officer call me directly and email me. He worked very closely with me. He told me everything I needed. He sent me this nice 2-page document, a list of everything I needed. And the things that you need are obviously a copy of your driver's license, a copy of your DOT medical card. And I only had one driver, but he only asked for one driver's license. So even if you have 5 drivers, I'm pretty sure he's only gonna ask, just give me one driver's license, give me one copy of one driver's DOT medical card. You're gonna need a list of your drivers and a list of your vehicles, but if you only have one driver and one vehicle, you don't need a list. You need a motor vehicle record history of one of your drivers. You can get that from your Department of Transportation, either 3 years or 10 years. And it's just basically like a list of any tickets or accidents that driver's ever had in the past. If you have a CDL truck, then you need to do pre-employment drug screening, and you need to have proof that your driver passed a pre-employment drug screen, and you also need to have proof that you're enrolled in a random drug screen. Finally, you obviously need insurance for your truck, and you need an annual DOT inspection for your truck. And then you need 30 days of your electronic logs. So he only asked for one truck's logs. So if you have one driver that kind of broke the rules and you have another driver that had a really safe and solid 30 days, from my new entrant safety audit, I only would have had to given him that driver's logs. Like, you don't have to give all of your logs, just one truck, one driver, 30 days of your log. Finally, I talked about the pre and the post-trip inspection. I understand whenever I was an operator in the military or even at Chewy, I hated doing pre and post inspections on my equipment. But whenever you are an owner operator, whenever you spend literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment, it starts to hit a little bit different. You start to realize the importance of maintaining your equipment. So actually on my website, harrisburgbookkeeping.com/store, I have a free pre and post trip inspection that you can download, and it has a detailed list of everything that you or your driver should be looking at for the pre and post trip inspection. I'm just going to talk about a couple things right now. Obviously the engine, your brakes, your wheels, your suspension, your cab, your frame, if you have a tractor trailer, your fifth wheel or your trailer. And then finally, just all of the gauges or the inside of the truck. It's not meant to be like an hour-long inspection. It's really only meant to be like 15 minutes, real quick at the beginning of the day, 15 minutes at the end of the day, just to notice anything out of the normal, out of the usual. And then in addition to the pre and post trip inspection, definitely take your truck to a trusted mechanic at least every 2 months, if not every single month, to not only get an oil change, but just to get an entire look over by a trusted mechanic. Because the last thing you want is to break down when you're thousands of miles away from home or loaded, so you're gonna miss out on a load or have to get a repair done at some other mechanic.